Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today here at the National Museum of African Art. My name is Allie Hartley, and I'm here with members of our Teen Ambassador program, and our Teen Ambassadors will be interviewing our very distinguished guest artist, Ato Malinda, this afternoon. And just as a background to the Teen Ambassador program, we are a youth development program where metro area teens are trained to give teen tours at the museum. So the four very distinguished teens sitting with me up here have participated in several hours of training where we do gallery activities, we learn about the history of art and study cultures and history of Africa, and we participate in other activities. We recently did a joint performance with the DC Youth Slam team, and in the fall, our big project will be planning a teen event at the museum. And today I'm joined with Taylor Sanders,
Hi.
Nick Stewart, Amyra Hassan, and Majula and I'm also joined by a slightly older but still younger artist, Ato Malinda, whose work on Fait, Ensemble is in the Divine Comedy exhibit. And Ata is also here on a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship. So the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship Program is a unique, globally competitive residency that supports artists in doing the collection, archives, and scholarly research that leads artists to produce some of the best in cutting-edge contemporary art. And in addition to being here on a fellowship, Ata's work is featured in the Divine Comedy exhibit. She has the work featured in the Divine Comedy exhibit is a video on Fait Ensemble, and it's about Mami Wata, a water spirit found across Africa, who has held a central position in diverse faith systems since at least the arrival of Europeans, and Mami Wata has been appearing in published records since the 15th century. To many, Mami Wata represents the wealth and dangers that come from across the ocean, and the history of her representation is a complex tangle that unites German human zoos with West African trade and Indian lithography. And in the video on Fait Ensemble, there's a metaphorical sense that suggests that the image of Mami Wata came from the Europeans, and the video is set to a poem by Langston Hughes. And this metaphorical sense of coming from Europeans is achieved through the market performance of Pape Wata, and Pape Wata is a male equivalent of Mami Wata in Benin, and he symbolizes the European man, and in this video is depicted by a white painted face. And the film was produced in Cameroon, even though Ato originates from Kenya. So Ato Malinda is currently living and working in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. She holds a Master of Fine Arts from the Transart Institute in New York and is currently a PhD candidate at Leiden University and the Royal Academy of Art. She has exhibited in several museums internationally, including NGBK in Berlin, MMK in Frankfurt, here at the National Museum of African Art, the Salon Urbain de Douala in Cameroon, and the Karen Blixen Museum in Copenhagen. So before I hand it off to our teen ambassadors who, in addition to the amount of research that they do in preparing their teen tours for the museum, also did a lot of research to prepare for this afternoon, I'd like to just start off by having Ata tell us a little bit about the work that she's been doing here on her fellowship at the museum.
Thank you for that introduction. Wow. So actually, I'll just say a little bit about what I've begun to do in my PhD and then sort of go into what I've been doing here. So what I'm doing with my PhD is investigating queerness, or I guess I don't want to make it more specific, but for purposes of conversation, LGBT issues. I'm looking at queerness in Kenya and how this is affected by media coming from the West, but in particular global media. So by looking at this, I've been looking at binary thought meaning gender binaries, so male, female, racial binaries, black, white, or even just simply yes, no. The fact that there is an answer and it's either this or that. Yeah. So, having said that, what I decided to do and apply to here was to look at how African objects are exhibited in Western museums, in particular in American museums. So applying to this fellowship here at the Smithsonian, I decided to critically, I think Amyra was talking about critical thinking, and this is really, it is something that really is quite essential for me in my own work. But to think critically how Africa is represented through the exhibition of these objects. So I came here thinking that the museums would actually be proliferating this binary thinking. And I was wonderfully surprised at, specifically, and I'm not saying this because we're doing this interview, but I was wonderfully surprised at the educational department because of really what you put together to have people from very young ages, you know, really look at how to look beyond Africa as a unitary form. As I know, the United States is a big country, and so it's very easy to think that Africa is also a country. But Africa is very large, and it's 54 different countries. And I thought that that museums were not really tackling this issue, and it seems very simple, but it's such a political issue when it comes to exhibiting African objects, and so having found out that this museum in particular was not doing that, and we're actually doing their best to show that there are tons and tons of different cultures happening on the continent of Africa, and actually have programs like the ones that you are a part of, where they teach you a lot about how Africa is represented, and also in turn you can teach other people. I found that quite inspirational. So I actually decided to look further at than the representation of Africa as a queer space, and how these objects are themselves representing a binary through historical narratives or through curatorial narratives, and stuff like this. So is that clear, or is it sort of, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so I think we're going to launch into some of the wonderful questions that our teens produced. And our teens actually wrote about 30 questions. So these are the top 8 of them. But I think they'll create some really wonderful discussions, and everyone will feel free to ask follow-up questions as well too, if you say something that sparks their interest.
Okay.
So we'll start with Ms. Taylor over here.
Okay, if you weren't the creator of your artwork, how would you describe it?
So I read this question before, and I thought about it, and I don't feel that I can separate myself from my own work. A lot of my work is very personal and is what I would call autoethnographic, or what anthropologists call autoethnographic, meaning that it's from my own life story. And I don't feel like I can view my life outside of myself as an artist, because I think that's self-defeating. And so I wouldn't really not think of myself as a creator of the artwork. Yeah.
Well, how would you want someone else, like your audiences, to like feel about your pieces?
Okay. So whenever I make stuff, it does come from me, but once it's made, it's no longer mine. and it then belongs to the people who engage with it, who see it. So however they feel they want to interact with it is up to them. So I'm not creating for a certain reaction. I'm creating because I feel I have to. Yeah.
What would you say to a person to persuade them if they disagreed with one of your pieces?
Yeah, again, I'm not in the business of persuasion. So, I'm not a lawyer, yeah? I'm a creator, and then I show. So, however someone... Did you say amazing?
Yeah. I did. That is amazing.
Yeah. So, someone doesn't have to think my work is amazing, yeah? It's honestly, it's not... I like it when someone engages with my work, but they don't have to say, oh, wow, that's amazing. They can say, oh, I like this, but I didn't like this. Mm-hmm. And they can even say, I didn't like it, because that in turn makes me see that they've actually interacted with it.
So do you prefer constructive criticism from your audiences?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, the next question. So in preparation, the Teen Ambassadors researched your body of work, and one thing that I noticed was that in the majority of your untitled drawings, you include small splashes of color on initially black and white slates. So does this element of your work have any correlation to color in a racial context?
Okay. So I find this question very difficult because I'll tell you why. Because every time I've gone to a lot of different countries in the world, and every time I come to the US, I feel like there is a framework that I have to perform within or react or act within. And that framework is I'm black and I'm female. And black females act a certain way. And I don't buy it. And the same goes for whiteness. I think that there is a framework, a cadre, a social reality for whiteness as well. And these are the binaries that I'm talking about. And in the United States, it's so obvious. It's painful. And so when I read your question, I was interested to see the race of the person who was asking the question. And then I just thought, for me, coming from Africa where I'm not a minority, and having grown up here and also in Europe, race hasn't been an issue. It's been an issue in the background, but it's not something that I have to deal with every day outside of the US. So actually, in response to your question, the minimalism of my drawings has nothing to do with race.
Okay. And I had a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So did you choose to leave these pieces untitled, and why? And how do you think titles and labels affect possible interpretations of artwork in general, or your own art?
Okay. Yes, I did choose to leave them untitled, and there are some that have parentheses saying self-portrait because I wanted the audience to know that it was a self-portrait. But otherwise, I think titles definitely affect, and in contemporary art can manipulate the reception of the artwork by the audience, and a lot of the times that's intentional by the artist. But for my drawings, I honestly, I couldn't think of something that would be all-encompassing, and so I thought just have it more void and look at the artwork for what it stands for. And that's true because it's such a minimalist, they're so minimalist, so why have a title,
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So, historically, African American artists and African artists who travel, they travel to France to sort of avoid the segregation that goes on in America, or like apartheid in in South Africa. So you live in Holland, right? Do you still feel the need, like, to fit into this framework of being a black woman, or is it sort of like in France where those tensions aren't really like as prevalent?
Yeah, I don't feel it as much here as there
In
as
Holland,
as I do here. Yeah, it's definitely different.
Just a question to go with that. Why do you think that in America they treat society and divides so much?
I think it's the history of this country. You know, this country is such a turbulent history that no one wants to talk about, or people do talk about it, but from
It's like
such
taboo.
polarized positions. And it's still a very young country. You know, race is a big issue. So, yeah, I don't know. I know it's still very fresh in people's minds even today. So,
So, throughout the years, your artwork has like shifted from like colonialism and gone more onto like African feminism and queerness. But do you feel as though you portray the effects of colonialism through your works that primarily have to do with African feminism? And if so, do you feel like the subjects of colonialism and African feminism are somehow related?
okay, so what I was working on was post-colonialism, not colonialism.
Yeah.
And there is a difference. Do you know the difference?
Yes.
Okay. So, oh,
Oh,
sorry.
do you want me to explain? The,
You can if you want.
no, you can go ahead with your interview.
No, please
Okay.
do.
So like post-colonialism is like the effects after colonialism in its like entirety. Like colonialism basically was especially in certain countries in Africa, like in Gambia for example, was when Europeans came in and tried to colonize and like forcefully like assimilate Africans into their culture, and then post-colonialism was like the effects of that particular situation.
Right, and I guess from colonialism there was the independence movements
Yes.
that sort of changed the track of the countries. Although I think intellectually post-colonialism and decolonialism came around in late 1970s and 1980s, when people started thinking really a lot more about how to form a nation, especially a nation that was put together by foreign powers, people grouped together with different interests. For example, in Kenya, there are 42 different tribes under one government, and that's somewhat unnatural, that you would have that many ethnicities. Obviously, the United States is it's a nation of immigrants, but when the people are already there and you're told you now belong to this place, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you, then it's difficult to start working together. And so the post-colonial state was a state of many identities that were trying to make it work. And the decolonialism was the process in which people sort of released the colonial, the sort of master-slave identity. But so I was working on the sort of state of being an African in the early 2000s, and what that meant. So being a child of parents who were teenagers during the independence movements and all this kind of stuff, and what that meant with my own history, having lived many different places, and again looking at a hybrid, which I talk about in fait, ensemble, looking at an African identity that is made up of many different parts of the world. But to come to how that works with feminism, I felt that post-colonialism was largely still patriarchal, or patriarchal endeavor, meaning that it had mainly to do with how African men saw the world or saw Africa. And in particular, heterosexual men. And I then moved on to look at more how I saw it, being queer, female, and African, and whether or not that was unique. I think that there are overlaps, but yeah, it's something that probably needs to grow a little bit more, because there is a history of pre-colonial queerness, of pre-colonial homosexuality in Africa, and whether or not Africans today can accept that history is something that I think people are working on. So that's something that maybe is for future Africa, you know. Yeah.
Do you think that having a negative reaction to your work, for example, being jailed in his freedom, or having your exhibit vandalized in Dakar 2014, is preferable to having a complacent audience? I mean, because if you get a negative reaction, like, you'll get attention, and then more people will be like, oh, what is she talking about? So,
Yeah.
for example, in our museum, we have the Conversations exhibit, which, you know, as, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bill Cosby thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and after that, like, people came to see it, and then they were like, you know, why is the Smithsonian still, like, putting this up? What's so great about it? Like, they were curious, but then after they left, like, having a good, you know, impression of it, so.
Right. Well, I mean, I personally hope that I never have to go to jail again. But yeah, I think that's a really difficult question. Because on the one hand, you know that you're making good art. You know, if you have such a violent reaction to what you're doing, and it is in the means of making a change, making a stand, then it's somewhat rewarding. It means that you actually did something that you know, that people might talk about and refer to, and possibly change the way people think. But yeah, on the other hand, complacent audiences are difficult. Yeah, then maybe, I think what it comes down to is really, and I think I saw a question of yours later. What it comes down to is safety. If you can do it safely and still make a difference, then that's probably what I would prefer. Yeah.
So I won't ask that second question, because, like, you already answered it.
No.
No, it's a great question, the second one.
Yeah, it's such a great
Also,
question.
I mean, you kind of already answered it, like, in Taylor's, but how would the ideal participatory audience respond to your work? And you said that you didn't want them to, like,
No.
like, you didn't want to force your, beliefs on them.
Definitely.
Have you ever, because I know you've curated some works before, do you include, like, participatory elements in there and incorporate it in, or is that more in your performance art?
In curating?
Yeah.
No, I don't think I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know within the museum industry or museum field nowadays, participatory is a huge trend that's happening
Okay.
here in America.
Okay.
So thinking about how that translates sort of on a global scale of museum and studies.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely, and that's what I was looking at your educational turn because participatory curating and exhibitions are, I think, really where, because, and this is the thing, is because you will find somehow, no matter how hard you try, you will find complacent audiences.
Yes.
You know, and how do you combat that? How do you go against that?
Well, and even with the teen tours that our teen ambassadors give, that we really push creating a participatory experience for our visitors. And I know Amyra, I think you were giving the tour where there was the one guy standing in the back who followed along, did not leave the tour, but would not answer any questions or participate in any of the participatory elements. And I guess it comes down to the fact that people absorb information differently.
I think
and
so, yeah.
you can't force participation on
it's
someone.
true.
And I'm just by the virtue of the fact that the man had really positive things to say afterwards, and he stayed with the tour, that he was getting something out of it, even if he wasn't fully participating in some of the
I think
the
that's very true.
participatory exercises. So.
So, when you began your career, did you ever fear that society wouldn't accept or understand your work?
Actually, when I began, I was in Texas, and at that time, the fear was more that I wouldn't understand what I wanted to do. So I was trying to understand what kind of art I wanted to make, and I had to get that clear for myself first. And then I moved to Kenya, and then I realized that what I wanted to do, there was no audience for that in Nairobi, in Kenya, where I was. So unfortunately, I just didn't do it. I painted instead, and I wanted to perform. And I think what happened was I waited on it for a little bit, and then I ended up moving to London for a little bit, and that's when I said, oh, no, I'm just going to do it regardless, no matter what. And and then I started performing, and yeah.
So has anything ever stood in the way between your artistic decisions?
Kind of. I grew up in a very scientific family, and my father was a scientist, and he didn't see the importance of art or humanities or anything like that, unless I wanted to be a lawyer. And so, yeah, I had to really fight to do what I am doing. Yeah.
So, how does your Kenyan background affect your perception of subjects such as queerness and feminism that are often portrayed by the media as purely Western and Eurocentric concerns?
Okay. Well, like I've already said, so I don't have a purely Kenyan background. It's Kenyan by birth, but maybe I didn't say explicitly, but I grew up in the Netherlands, and then I went to high school in Kenya, and then I moved to Texas when I was 15. So I have a sort of very diverse kind of childhood, and I think by having this sort of diversity helped me understand who I was, because had I been, I think, from a family that hadn't left Kenya, I think it would be very difficult for me to come to terms with being gay, and although it was very difficult anyways, and also to come to terms with the fact that I can love myself as a feminist, you know? And as far as Afrocentricity or Eurocentricity goes, I feel like they are terms that serve their purpose to a certain degree, but then after a while, it proliferates the binary, and it is us and them, and for me, that's not what I feel queerness is. And I feel queerness is subverting this binary and allowing for plurality, meaning lots of different things, right? So, yeah, so that's how I think Kenyanness affects me.
And I think that question, we were having a lot of conversations. I know Amyra and Majula and I have had lots of conversations about how feminism in America has been very co-opted by white women. And I think it's interesting bringing, especially given some of our previous discussions and questions about like just the idea that the polarity of race in America, how someone coming from a more international background might view the way that like white women have co-opted feminism in America, which I say as white woman feminists.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of factions of feminism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the French feminists, the Americans, the Africans, and actually, because I have a Western education, I mean, and this is something that I ask myself, do I have to deny myself Western canons because I was born in a certain place, but at the same time, how do I deny my own education and my own life experience, you know? And yeah, my first personal experience of feminism was in undergrad with reading Simone de Beauvoir, you know, so that's Western, you know, and to a certain degree I was affirmed by what she had to say, so yeah. Yeah, it's difficult, and that's what I'm saying. You don't have to say that's Eurocentric, so I'm not going to touch that, you know, or that's Afrocentric, so I'm not going to touch that because maybe that's primitive, or whatever you're thinking, you know. I think that it's for me, I think it's important to get what you can, you know, and make your own identity, you know.
Well, and I think one of the things that was framing my thinking in formulating this program that our students are a part of as well is that especially today, you don't live single national lives, or there's, and especially here in the DC area being such a diverse area in terms of the immigrants within the DC area, is that you're not going to make it through high school in the DC area without encountering someone who's living has a different identity as you. Like when you don't have a unilateral identity, and you don't because of the opportunities to meet diverse people, their experiences color your experiences as well. So there's no single experience, and that's sort of the cross-cultural communication, which was were the principles that our museum was founded on, and that we talk about a lot in our program. Sorry, I'll give it back to the teen ambassadors here.
As an artist, are you like selective of the places that you show your work? Like, do you adapt the pieces to the audience you're trying to reach?
I don't. I am selective, but I don't adapt the piece, or the fundamentals of the piece itself. But if I am, for example, commissioned to make a work for a specific place, then I will do that with the audience in mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like, follow-up question, when you pick, like for example, when you did Is Freedom, like did you decide to put a cage in like a center of like it looked like it was a populated area in the picture.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to put it in like a place of like such commotion, basically?
Well, it's because it's the spaces at the meeting point of different classes in the city of Nairobi. So on one side of or behind the building, the National Archives building, is the sort of less fortunate classes, if that's what, if you will, and the other side is the more business side. So the more not business side, sorry, the more halves of Nairobi. So this is a place where they come together, and so there's a lot of traffic of different kinds of people coming through, and so I wanted the performance to be seen by a lot of people, and yeah, I think, and at the time, I mean, now it's that area's really changed and developed, and now it has become a space for public performances, you know, all kinds of performances, art performances, but also spiritual performances and what have you. So, excuse me. Yeah, I just wanted it for the crosstown traffic. Yeah.
And I have a follow-up to that. So I think you work as a freelance curator. Is that right?
Well, actually, I stopped.
Oh, you stopped. Okay. Well, during your work as a curator, how did that sort of affect your decisions, sort of when you're arranging different elements of your work, sort of on a micro level? So how does that macro level of being a curator affect your more individual decisions?
Individual decisions of that specific exhibition,
Of sort of arranging your work, your artwork.
Okay. When I was curating, I separated my own artwork from my curatorial work. There was a huge division because I didn't feel like I could curate a show with my own work. Yeah, so I feel like there's a certain hierarchy that happens with curatorial work and artist work, and yeah, I'm more interested now in producing art that is without the hierarchy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to know, so transitioning from a curator to the artist, did it ever feel did it ever feel uncomfortable from going from like the person that creates these places and pieces for artwork to the person whose pieces are being shown?
No, because I began as an artist. I wasn't a curator first and then became an artist. I was an artist and then started curating out of necessity to create critical dialogue in Nairobi. When I stopped curating, the only thing that I realized that I had to do was relinquish control. To a certain degree, that's a good thing for me, and it was hard, but it also for me gave me room to be more creative.
Do you think that having the experience as a curator has affected in any ways like your interactions with curators who are showing your work at all? They're a little more sensitive to what they're going through since you know their job so intimately.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I am sympathetic, yeah.
Now I understand with budgets and all
Yeah.
that, the things that, the sort of behind the scenes element.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And finally, as a successful artist and queer woman of color yourself, what advice would you give to young and budding artists who aren't in an environment that is open to new ideas or where it might even be dangerous for them? to make
Okay.
art.
Are you asking this because you're queer?
No.
Okay. So you're just
I mean, I
wondering.
just, yeah.
Okay. Again, with the answer, like we were talking about with being in jail, I would say that it's very important to know where you're safe, because, I've lived the past 3 years in Kenya, in Nairobi, out. And meaning out of the closet, meaning people knew that I am gay, and I felt that it was essential for me not to make my sexuality so visible, and that was for my own safety. And also for, to a certain degree, the social, how can I say it? Like, to a certain degree, it was, I guess, social upkeep, or for my family's sake. You know, because to a certain degree they also go through the repercussions of having a gay family member. So yeah, so I think it's important to know where you're safe. But if you can work towards being in a safer space where you can express yourself, then, I mean, that is literally what I did. Was I moved to the Netherlands, and I feel a lot freer. I feel that I can be myself. So yeah.
And just sort of as a follow-up final question, what advice might you have to any young artists who may be joining from their homes or computer screens? Today our young artists here, both Taylor and Nick are artists of quite distinction. So we have some wonderful artists in our program, and hopefully wonderful artists watching on YouTube.
I would say, really, no matter what you think is up against you, you can get through it. Challenges will come, and they will make you better artists. And if you use that challenge as means to express what it is you feel you need to express, then that would just make you a stronger artist, and probably more recognized for being honest in the life that you've been given. So yeah, go for it.
All right, thank you, Ato, for speaking with us today. I know Ato mentioned she's never been interviewed by teenagers before, so I hope this wasn't as a horrible or painful experience. And we're so glad that you took the time to speak with us
Thank you.
today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.